One thing we realized was that we each did a quick lightning talk yesterday that some people heard and some didn't about the projects we're working on. So it's probably worth just taking a minute to explain Election Watch.
Okay, yeah. It was difficult to do in 7 minutes,
Now you
but
have one.
I will try to do it in one. Election Watch is a tool that we built under the Innovation Challenge to help monitor, or as I like to say, analyze disinformation during elections. What we discovered during elections is that disinformation in elections are empowered by malinformation, by the malice between political parties and the mudslinging, and there is no real concern or consequence for the real life effects of these things. But most importantly, it's difficult for journalists to keep up. It's difficult on a normal dull day, but during elections, everything is just supercharged, hypercharged, and difficult to follow. So what Election Watch does is that it gathers all the noise and all the data of disinformation that you find, and you do not necessarily need to spell it. Just gather all the data you find, and it will analyze it. It will help you map out the timelines, and it will actually even show you who the actors are. So that's basically what it does. It analyzes the information that you pass through it. It will map out the actors, and it will show you the timelines and the duration of this. And it will also give you a summary, some sort of a short draft that you can publish if you're not in the mood to write a new story. Or you can actually use that summary to inform the stories. This is, in maybe 1 minute or less, what it does. But the job is to deploy this during elections, from campaigning season all the way, and stay ahead of the disinformation.
Yeah, although now it seems like there's so much disinformation all the time, right, even between elections.
All the time, and the ultimate goal is a journalist will know, and a newsroom, because our core audiences are journalists who become, at least in Africa, fact checkers during elections, and then the newsroom, and of course, electoral monitoring bodies, people who decide to do those things and gather data. Now, if you choose to use it outside of an election season, that's fine.
Yeah.
But we design it with that chaos in mind, hence Election Watch.
No, and I mean, fact checking used to be something you did a lot during elections, right? And it still is. We built a tool in California. The state legislature in California, they're responsible for $300 billion of spending a year. And 10 years ago, there was nobody paying attention at all. No journalists covering the state capitol, very few. And so CalMatters was created to fill that gap and to cover the state government and policy news in California. We built this tool to bring in all the information you could possibly imagine about every state legislator. So where they get their money, how much money was given to them and by who, their voting records, the words they speak on the floor of the legislature and the committees, the gifts they get, the forms they have to fill out disclosing all of their travel and such. Pull all that stuff together. It's all public government information, but it's in so many different places you could never find it, or really, it couldn't be useful until you pull it all together. Bring it all together, make it available in a very nice tool people can use, but then apply AI to it to find story ideas. So we can say to a journalist, this legislator from your district, and give it to journalists all over California, not just our staff, this legislator from your district who your readers elected and sent to the state capitol to represent you and whose salary they're paying and pay no attention to for the whole time they're in office, we can now tell you what they're doing, and you can write stories about them in your local publication for your local community. And like you, I think we built a tool specifically for one thing, which is for us to cover the California state government. I imagine you're an international consortium. So you're not working on just one election, but you started with Nigeria, right?
Yes, because we built a tool that we needed. We built a tool we hoped we had when we had the election. So the background of all of this is the elections that we did in the Nigeria had its 2023 elections, and after those elections, we spent 1 full year investigating that election. And what we found out from the presidential election specifically was that there were 4 major factors affecting elections like that, and we realized it's a global idea. It's the same thing everywhere. There's disinformation that affects how voters participate. There is the violence in some parts of the world and suppression of voters and intimidation. Then there is the constant claim that there's been a malfeasance with the electoral machines or the machinery and the tech. And then
by the loser, always by the loser.
In Nigeria, it's losers and winners.
Okay.
Like, everyone suspects the tech.
Okay.
And then on the other hand, violation of electoral laws. That's becoming even more prominent in places who used to tout freedom, freedom of press and democracy. Everyone seems to find ways to, violate electoral laws. And so when we built that, when we were investigating that, we had to go through more than 170,000 ballot papers and scrape beyond 10,000 faulty, misrepresented copies. We worked with OCR, a lot of machine learning, a lot of stuff just to go through those papers alone. So in that time, we invested a year because we had no other way to make it simpler. And we had to come up with methodologies that we published that informed a playbook and informed Election Watch, right? So we built something that we would have loved to have at that time. So imagine many journalists who would want to track after the fact an election that has already been done. It's less risky for journalists to monitor elections after elections have been done. To investigate it, it's less risky than doing it while it's happening.
Right.
Because when it's happening live, journalists faced animosity not just from the political party, but also from the voters, from people who are already invested emotionally in these parties and in the election itself.
Especially when you tell them something they don't want to hear.
Especially when you tell them something. And you can only know what they don't want to hear after it's done, when you can find evidence in the papers,
Yeah.
in the ballot.
And so what did you find? What were your learnings about that 2023 election?
Oh, it was so much. But I can say that we did learn. We did learn. It's hard to say without smiling, because while we were working on that investigation, sometimes we will pause and just laugh at how ridiculous it is. Many of my colleagues are international. There's a lot of us from the US, South Africa, China. We work from everywhere. But those of us who are Nigerian are familiar with what and sometimes how shocked my colleagues were was quite entertaining to me. We found ballot papers that were altered after the vote, altered by the officials themselves who were supposed to guard these papers. Some people took photos of handbags and designer glasses, and I'm sure something they would have loved to own someday in life, and put that in as a ballot paper. We had cases where people actually canceled out the numbers and replaced it with another and signed on it as a legitimate copy. There was just, what happened can only be imagined in movies, but that was real life.
That was real.
But it's not a job, like I said to someone yesterday, of a journalist to say, now that I found these things, this election is, null and void. That's not the journalist's job. The job of the journalist, as we're talking about tracking political power, is to show you what it is, and then you make the choice of the truth. Unfortunately, that's where we are, where people get to decide what the truth is.
Which truth they want to believe.
Thank you. And so you just have to show them with all evidence to back it, and I think that's where AI comes in, and that's also where I'm going to come to you in a bit to say, when you're tracking political power and using AI, as much as we want to disclose that AI is the tool that we're using here, we need to be very careful, one, what kind of AI you want to use, because you don't want to lean a lot on the generative, because then an argument can be made that it is producing something for you that you cannot support. Right. So Election Watch is not a generative AI at all. It's an AI agent. It is strictly given a job, and it does the job. And then on the other hand, you want to have told your story first. You want to have tracked whatever you're tracking, reported on it, before you start all of the disclosure and methodology, because you don't want to give people now in this time of distrust for the powers behind AI that, it's been somehow sponsored by ChatGPT.
Right.
And somehow OpenAI is the reason why you're investigating this political power.
Right. You're investing other things that can't be trusted, and you don't want to lose the trust.
You don't want to lose the trust, so you just have to produce the journalism first.
Yeah.
And then the AI remains the tool that you use as you would anything else.
Because trust is the only thing we actually have as journalists. That's the only...
Which we barely have now.
Currency we have, right.
Yeah.
Right. As some people have tried to destroy it.
Yeah.
So in doing this work, we take the same approach. The tools we use are not generative. These are agents, these are tools that go and look at the data and try to find anomalies. This member of the legislature always voted with the teachers union every year for years and years, and suddenly this year voted against them. And always got money from these funders, and this year got money from a different place. Or hasn't shown up for a vote in 6 months. That's a story people love, right? When my member is not even voting, those kinds of things. And it's data that you identify that maybe somebody would have seen if the journalist was in the building watching people, talking to people, like watching what happens back when there were 100 and some journalists covering the California state capitol. But now, if you can see this anomaly in the data, that's a data point. It's not a story. We don't publish that. We equate it with the scribbles a reporter might have in their notebook. Why was that person talking to this person? Or why did this happen after that happened? It's a tip. And we generate these tip sheets. We do use generative AI for the tip sheet, but the tip sheet just says, here's a summary of why we identified this, and those tip sheets only go to journalists. They don't get published publicly.
Yeah.
And so that tip sheet gives a journalist a head start, and it has a lot of information. A journalist who's got to do a story quickly could write something really quickly. Another journalist might just collect a bunch of those tips long-term for an investigative project. And the idea is simply to do the legwork and save the time it would take somebody to go through all this information to try to find a story, because 99% of what the AI finds is not a good story idea, but the 1% that actually might be good is what you can use. And so we're trying to find things in real time that are worth saying to a reporter, hey, look at that. Go, if you're interested, here's a head start.
But can I ask if maybe the stories in time, these stories that we gather using AI, of course, 80% we might not need at the time, can become data on their own in and of itself? Because I'm thinking when we were investigating Democracy the Fed, a woman lost her husband. And the story she shared was they were talking about the election. He was adamant he had to vote. She left him and went to the market or something. I don't want to misrepresent. Where she was, there was commotion around polling centers. And she just felt like going home to be sure everybody's fine and she's safe. Gets there, no husband, heard someone, there were gunshots everywhere. Who died? Her husband, right? And she made a comment. Her comment simply was, she will never, ever vote again or allow her children ever participate in any democratic practice in Nigeria ever again. And that was her stand, and it became so. And it will be so, because every time there's an election, she and her kids will stay away, and it will always remember, it will always be a bad memory for them. It will bring pain. And I wonder, say, this story is written and archived, there'll be more stories like that showing suppression and intimidation for voters and why there's apathy, for instance, in Nigeria. In 20 years, as we process these stories through AI and we have this data bank and we store it, can AI then process these stories as data that informs apathy or not during elections?
And help us understand the change. Right?
Absolutely. See what the timeline has been.
Yeah, it may be better, it may be worse by then. The problem, of course, is that there's the same tools we're trying to use to track down real information are being used to generate disinformation. And it's a lot easier to generate the disinformation because you don't have to fact check it and make sure it's spelled right, everything else. But yeah, over time, and for us, over place as well. So we're doing it in California. We're trying in another state, Hawaii, and we're thinking about other US states and maybe other countries. There's another group trying to do something with the UK Parliament and the European Parliament. And if you look at this over a number of places, for instance, if you're 5 years from now, if you've used Election Watch on 20 different elections across Africa, you might have patterns, you might have bigger stories to tell, right?
Right, and talking about that, so Neil and I were chatting and saying, how are we going to handle this fireside chat? We've chatted like 2 times already. We might not have anything to give you. And we started another semi-fireside chat about the tools we're building and the use of AI. Now, from one of the sessions earlier, people were talking about understanding AI as a tool, as a means to doing the work better, getting familiar and less intimidated by it. But we were talking about the cost of it, right? Yeah. Now we have found the possibility of using AI to do this good work, but how do we keep using it? I mean, no matter how rich journalism might be, it is not half as rich as tech. And we have to evolve with tech, otherwise we'll be left behind. And so we have to find these ways. But then how do we sustain AI to do the work that we need it to do?
Are we becoming tech companies?
Are we becoming tech companies? We cannot become tech companies.
Or do we find a tech company to do this for us?
But do we want a tech company to have charge of the AI that does the political work?
Then it won't be doing journalism, right?
Yeah, so what do we do?
Yeah, and so for us, as we think about, people come to us from other states in the US and they say, will you expand this tool to serve our state? We say, we'd love to. It's not cheap. It takes a lot of work to build it out for another state. We're figuring out how to do that. I would love for somebody to bring us a large amount of money and say, yes, let's make this happen all over the United States. There may be profit in this. This data would be very interesting to the folks who would pay for professional level data about lobbying, about corporate influence in America. The folks who would pay for that are the ones who are doing the corporate influence in America. So we would literally have them paying us to track their behavior, but also letting them use the information, which is fascinating. And maybe the way we end up going, in the fantasy world that I live in, as somebody who runs a nonprofit journalism organization, I would like to think there are people who believe this is important. Yeah. The credibility of elections is incredibly important everywhere. That the behavior of legislative members is incredibly important, and they should fund this as a public good.
Yeah, so we
and
thought
give
about
you and me a lot of money to each of us.
Because we're both nonprofit.
Right.
And then we thought maybe one philanthropist isn't so good. I mean,
you need a couple, right?
We need a couple.
You don't want to lean on one. We've all seen what happens when one philanthropist builds a news organization or something and then decides they're done and walks away.
Exactly. Or decides maybe now there is true democracy, so there is no need spending money on election watch. Right. So
speaking of tech leaders.
Exactly.
Yes.
You know, and it's funny, but this is also an idea, sustainability, right? There will come to a point where a good idea dies, and it will die with the journalism with it, because there is just no way to sustain it. So if we're thinking,
or because we didn't find the way to sustain it.
But okay, we might search for the way to sustain it.
Yeah.
We might search, but to find means someone has to be interesting enough or interested enough to give you what you need, and then you'll claim you found it.
So this is where somebody in the audience comes up and says, I will give you all the money for this project, right?
You know, that's why I've been saying it and looking this way, but I don't see anybody inspired enough to want to give us anything
Not
yet.
Not
yet.
But there are people out there, and we've actually had some success in California. We met with this one woman who had been in government for a long time and has a substantial amount of wealth. And we talked to her for a little while, and then she called back and asked some more questions, and gave us a substantial check to help advance this thing and said, here, this is a good idea. You should take this money. And I do think if we go out there and start knocking on doors, we will find more people who want to support this, especially right now in the United States, where you may have heard things are a little crazy. And that motivates people, I think, to be worried about the future of our democracy, if we still have one, which is in question. And kind of makes you want to be Canadian right now. But this is a moment that perhaps we should take advantage of, because it is not, I mean, the question about the sanctity of elections is global.
Yeah, I mean, in CCIJ, we're basically sustained by donor funding, and this isn't giant donors, it's small donor funding. People who say, we like the journalism you do, and they give us all the way from $5 to $20,000, you know, and just invest in the journalism we do, and it takes us year by year. And they're all very interested in having a tool that can help. Because this is, you made a good point in one of our private fireside chats, that this is a global tool. We're both building global tools that can be used anywhere. And the advantage of tools like this is that they can save and store data. But then I think about talking about Election Watch to an average person, a non-journalist, a non-tech person, a non-product person, and saying we can track what's happening with elections using this, and how does it work? And I break down machine learning, and I break it down to the simplest way, and AI, and I worry. And tell me if you worry about that I would also have to deal with the distrust people are now having for AI and tech, even though it's doing good journalism. So while we are trying to do the good work with the AI, how do we keep the people who it should help invested in the work.
Because you don't talk about it being an AI. You don't hide it, but you don't. We're not doing this because we're nerds about AI and we want to invest in AI and we want to learn about AI. We're using AI as a tool to do the journalism we both want to do, right? And if we lose that story, if we stop telling the story about journalists doing journalism with some help from tools, we used to use typewriters and we used to use, the postal service. I mean, it's the minute we start becoming tech nerds about this and talk about how exciting the AI is as opposed to the results of it, which is the journalism, then we cross into that place where we're no longer driven by the values that made this happen in the first place, right?
So is it responsibility of a journalist to talk about AI as a tool, as a process to doing the work, as opposed to maybe this, because it's a little bit of our fault, the way AI has been glorified and almost
I'm looking behind you at the name, it says JournalismAI.
Yeah,
right there,
I mean, they gave me money, so.
Right, and we love it, yes.
We love it, it's not their fault. But it's really the journalist's fault. So, but I'm saying it also leads, the narrative is also on us, because it's very interesting to want to hold power to account, but I'm also thinking in these elections, as we process them and gather data like we've talked about, and this data informs elections in 20 years, we also need to be aware that the technology will change, these tools will grow and build, and they'll come to a point where they themselves can start to define the trend an election is taking. For instance, yours, when a legislature or a legislator starts to change, for instance, what they support or start to make certain changes, and this is all being tracked.
Right.
Sometimes that informs, that almost predicts, because that's the good thing with non-generative AIs, that they become intuitive. And from that intuition, we start to see somehow like a call for the future, what this could look like.
Right.
And would that be, in a way, tracking political power, or will that be projecting where the political wind will be going? Aren't they two different things? Doesn't that give us a little bit more power?
I guess if you see a trend over time, you can expect that trend is going to continue into next year. And so 5 years from now, more legislators will be voting this way. And that's, we can probably use it as a predictive tool, which we hadn't even thought about. There's so many things we haven't thought about. Somebody came to me the other day and said, the AI you're using to query your data about legislators, could it also look at this data? We have a whole database on gun violence in America. Could you apply the same AI to go look at that and try to find anomalies in that data? And I said, I don't know, maybe. Good question. That's the fun part of this, right, is discovering all the possibilities. Or being afraid of them. Question time?
Yeah.
There are questions?
Sure. Or people with large checkbooks who want to fund this work.
Hello, Nick Wren, independent advisor. I'm sorry I don't have a large
you don't sound very wealthy, Nick, sorry.
Thanks very much for this. I'm wondering if either of you have come under any pressure from politicians or political parties as a result of the work that you've done.
Thank you. I'll go first because mine will be very short. CCIJ is so small, we're like a team of 10, and we just built this. So no attention yet. Over to you.
The funniest thing that we've encountered is members of the state legislature who say, this is a really important tool. I'm so glad you built this. It's vital. I don't think my colleagues are going to like it, but I like it a lot. And they all say the same thing. We have had people, the good news is we've had people come to us and say, something in your data is incorrect. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. They think it's important enough to watch it and to question it and to bring up problems with it, which is the first step. When your readers stop complaining, that's when it's a bad sign, right? We've not had anybody challenge our ability to do this or the need for it, but it is early. We're only a couple years into this, and I imagine the first time we do something that really upsets somebody with some power, we'll perhaps hear about it. But it's we're a nonprofit, and we have lost funding because we have to write about something that's related to somebody who's funding us, and they take the funding away. That's part of the business here. So nothing terrible yet. But of course, things are getting worse in the States every day.
But isn't it exciting, though, for journalists when they start complaining?
Yes.
Yeah, then you know you're doing something good.
Yeah.
I can't wait for my first complaint.
I will complain tomorrow.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi, actually a related question. Tom Troynard also don't have any big checks. When you do come under political pressure, do you think it's likely that their angle will be, oh, you've used AI for this story, and therefore that's their kind of get out. And I'm just, I guess, as the consequence of that is I'm asking you, how can you buttress and push back against that when I think it will inevitably be the kind of point that they're trying to make?
I mean, they already accuse us of, there are people in the US and everywhere who accuse journalists of lying every day, right? And it seems like more and more now it used to be attributed in some places to just carelessness or sloppiness or not caring. There's much more of an impression now that you're biased on one side or the other, and so, or both. And so I don't know that the criticism would change any, but I think we have to keep telling that story of we are using AI to assist human journalists in making determinations about things and sort of counter that narrative as best we can. But it's going to happen for sure.
I think that that will be the claim for sure. And they'll say it's AI, and they'll talk about everything crazy about AI. And I think especially for Election Watch, it will come with such venom and malice. And that's what we anticipate. I hope that by the time it does, more newsrooms and more journalists have benefited enough from it that the value speaks for itself. I'm already thinking about a strategy for explaining this to the voting population to see that this is why. But at the end of it, like I said, people choose their truth these days. So they'll decide if they like that this tool is telling them that your election might be problematic from what we've found, and they make that democratic decision on their own. Or if they would like to spend all the time arguing about the tool, that would just be, but I hope enough journalists have used it to find value in it.
And if everybody starts to think everything is AI generated and you can't trust anything, then it goes back to the trust. We have our brand, right? If you think every photograph you see is probably fake, but then you see a photograph from a brand you trust, a journalist you trust, a news organization you trust, that identity as a journalist may turn out to be the only distinguishing. All the stuff about watermarks and all the technical things you can do, that's good for us. It's good for verifying something's real. Your average reader's not looking at that stuff. And so maybe in a world where nobody trusts anything, the one thing we have left they might trust might be our brands.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. Hi, Neil. Hi, Nelly.
Hi.
So I have a question, which is, what's the minimum viable team that you need to build something like this from scratch? It's a big question, I know, but I represent a fact checker in India, and we have many states, and there are attempts to build something out of this using open data. But I think in our case, finding the data itself is difficult. So if you can say something about the minimum size of a team that you need to build something like this.
For us, we started with 2, then we hired developers. It was just me and my data editor. And what we started with was first defining what we wanted to build. Then we got the money, then we hired a technical team. And we found the data from the investigation. So I would always say, if you want to do anything on disinformation, investigate the disinformation first. We had to scrape the IRF, which was a portal where all of the ballot papers were supposedly stored, and then it was shut down. And we had found in the course of the investigation independent activists who had gathered some more data, and electoral monitoring bodies. That's why they're one of our, target audience, who had gathered so much data. So we just collected as much as possible. When you've had it, and then investigating the disinformation tells you what you need to build to solve a problem that you found, maybe you wasted so much time solving, cost you so much money to solve. So the tool comes after you found the problem, not before. And after you've done the legwork, the journalistic work that makes it useful. Otherwise, you might find an over-reliance on the AI, which defeats the purpose.
So in your case, you were investigating an election in the country where you live and where you are a journalist.
Yeah.
And so if somebody wants to use this in another country, they can take your technology, but they're going to have to go do the legwork in that country to find the data, to find the original material, to find the input for it, right?
Yeah, so the way it is right now, if I'll quickly answer that, is for us, and we were investigating an election in Nigeria, not because I'm Nigerian, or there's just about a couple or 3 of us Nigerians in the team, but because that election was fraught with a lot. And we gathered the data leading to this. So it's helpful most of the data, to be fair, and that Election Watch does, is social data. So this is data already there. Most of what we used were open source as well. So we intentionally built it on open source tools so that small newsrooms don't have to pay too much money to do it. And so you can gather electoral ballot data if you want. But no, if you get it, you just have a paper. You have to do the OCR, the machine learning. You have to convert it to soft data that you can actually process. But if it's disinformation, you don't need to go too far. You just need to go where everybody talks.
In social media.
Yeah, and you get it.
We actually built this on top of other work. It's a partnership. So the first version of this was built 10 years ago, specifically as a tool to pull in the video and make it usable by Californians. And so we had that already built. Now we have a 10-year-old database that really needs to be rebuilt in the manner of something we built today. And for the most important the hard part of the web development, getting all this data into a really nice web interface, we went to an outside company that does that professionally. It was beyond our capability. So it's very much a group effort. And as we think about going into other places, we have to think about we're scraping data from, I think it's 100 and some other sources. So how do we do that in each individual state? And if we're lucky, there's a news organization there that already has a head start on that.
Okay, so last question.
Okay.
There.
Hi.
She's been raising her hand. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Miriam. I'm a journalist and educator, and I'm sorry I haven't got any money, but I'd like to give you both some money. I suppose I'm interested in the core data. So when you're saying about scraping the data and the data you're using, in the political climate we're in, how long do you think it is before, or do you predict that the data might be given out differently because they can see how well you're scrutinizing it with all these tools? Are they going to give us less? Is it going to be wrong? Like, do you have those concerns?
I mean, yeah, in the US right now at the federal level, a lot of the data that used to be easily available is now no longer being compiled, or if it's being compiled, it's not being released. And so there's a bit of a panic right now in journalism at the federal level in the United States around how to even report on the number of people who don't have a job right now, or unemployment data and things like that, because we always used to trust the sources. The sources were, despite whoever's the president, whatever political party's in power, those sources were career government, service people who did their jobs well, and now that's all being corrupted. So for us, at the state level, it's not so much a problem yet, but we do have data sources breaking all the time. A format changes. It's a nonstop process to keep your hands on the data, and there are going to be people, especially depending on what party's in power, who want to block that stuff, and you have to find other sources, or you have to find somebody else. In this case, like for employment data in the U.S., we're using private economists who are making their best predictions but don't have this government data. So that's a real problem right now.
Last question. I know that we are over time. Thank you. Hi, I'm Gabby. I'm a disinformation journalist from the Philippines, so that should tell you everything about the things I've seen. But just for some context, I think one of the difficulties that we had in monitoring disinformation was that, especially in the last presidential election, was that journalists were playing catch-up with the disinformation that politicians were spreading. And of course, that has a lot to do with like the capabilities of a newsroom in terms of, finances, the tools available, the manpower, the skills of the journalists. So how do you take that into consideration? Because there are a lot of limitations in the data that we can cover. We just have to get from public sources. And of course, if we start monitoring from campaign period, that might pose a problem for some disinformation campaigns that have been going on for years now. So what's a good way to go about those limitations?
So I'll say that it's always best to just go on with it regularly as you would, and not really wait for a campaign period. But the difference is towards campaign periods, these things are overcharged and supercharged, and that's when it's actually harder to be in front of it. But for some countries like yours, the campaigning never stops. It just officially starts. It's been going on. The fighting and the infighting have been going on. And so for a tool like Election Watch, if it's disinformation from what we found out from our experience, for instance, if it's corruption, like the ballot boxes, you have to find evidence in these ballot papers. But if it's disinformation, it's just the communication going back and forth, the words, the language out there, the contortion of reality that's out there, and it's often in social, mostly. For us, we scrape news websites because we learned that some websites come up and they're fake, and they go off after the elections. So we start from these so-called fake websites. So you have to run all that data. Election Watch allows you store it. So if you're not ready to analyze, you can actually start storing it and compiling everything you found. And when you're ready, it will run analysis through all that you stored. And it can take about 30 to 50 data sets just stored at once. And we're planning to increase it as it goes. So that helps you get it all done at once you've gathered as much as you need.
But you're right. It's the pace is picking up. There's so much coming at you so quickly, right? That's
right.
why you have to have
That's
the
why
tools.
we're hoping you can do that, because to be ahead of it, you have to be in the same home with them when they're strategically planning the lie. But if you're not there, then you just have to do what you see when it's in public. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, but we have to finish now, because there's lunch.
There's lunch.
Outside.
Yeah.
And I imagine that everyone's hungry. I mean, at least I'm starving.
Thank you.
But thank you
Thank you.
so much.